All right, welcome. Today, we're going to jump into a really fascinating theological argument from E.W. Bullinger. He looks at the nature of faith, but he does it by using two really famous stories as his key pieces of evidence. So let's just start with this question, right? How can an old man's blessing, how can that be an act that overcomes the world? I mean, when we think of world overcoming faith, we usually picture something huge, something public, a big spectacle. But the source text we're looking at finds it in this incredibly quiet, private, and deeply personal moment. And this quote from Hebrews is really the anchor for this whole discussion. It's the core definition we're going to be working with. Faith, it says, is the foundation for things hoped for. So it's not about what you can see and touch right now. It's about the substance, the reality of what you hope for, all based on a promise. All right, so let's get into the framework. The author, Bullinger, he doesn't just pull out random examples. He builds his entire argument on a really unique structure of paired witnesses. He believes these pairs were put there on purpose, divinely placed to teach us one single powerful lesson. And check this out. This is the entire argument laid out right here. You've got two pairs of witnesses. Each one is meant to show faith winning a different part of battle. Now, for our purposes today, we're really going to zero in on that first pair, Isaac and Jacob. Okay, so first up is our first case study, Isaac. And the way the text frames his story is as this really deep, profound internal struggle. So here is the conflict boiled down. On one side, you've got God's will. It was made super clear that the younger son, Jacob, was supposed to get the blessing. But on the other side, you've got Isaac's will, his personal preference, and he wanted to bless the older son, Esau. And this verse from Genesis just lays it all out, plain as day. Why did Isaac prefer Esau? Because he liked the food Esau brought him. I mean, it wasn't some huge, complex theological disagreement. It was about taste, about personal affection. And this is what the author calls köttets vilje, or the will of the flesh. So the internal battle here was just huge. Think about it. Isaac knew God's will was to bless Jacob. He also knew his favorite son Esau had just thrown away his birthright for a bowl of soup. And yet, his own desire, his own gut feeling to bless Esau was just so powerful. And of course, all the family drama, the deception from Jacob and Rebekah, that just created the perfect storm, the crisis moment. But here's the crucial point the author makes. In the end, Isaac's blessing of Jacob isn't presented as just the result of him being tricked. No, it's presented as an act by faith. Why? Because despite all the chaos, despite his own internal desires pulling him the other way, his final action lined up with God's will. So for Isaac, the victory was over his own will. Faith overcame what he wanted. It was an internal battle, and he won. Now, what about Jacob? Well, his story is the other side of the coin. For him, faith had to overcome someone else's will. Okay, so on to our second case study, Jacob, and what the author calls the will of man. Years and years later, Jacob is the one who is old and dying, and he faces a really similar choice. But this time, the pressure isn't coming from inside himself, it's coming from his most beloved, most powerful son, Joseph. And look at this, the parallel is almost perfect. Again, you have God's will versus a human will. God wants to bless the younger grandson, Ephraim. But Joseph, he wants the blessing to go to the older grandson, Manasseh. Joseph is literally trying to guide his father's hands, representing that will of man, pushing back. And this confrontation is so vivid. Joseph places his sons very strategically to make it easy for his father. But Jacob, even though he can barely see, he deliberately crosses his hands. And Joseph protests. He says, "Not so, my father." He's trying to fix it. And Jacob, he just stays completely resolute. And Jacob's response is just so powerful. "I know it, my son. I know it." There's zero hesitation here. Remember how Isaac was trembling? Not Jacob. He acts with absolute certainty. This is a faith that is strong enough to overcome that external pressure, even from someone he loves so much. And this is a really fascinating detail that the author points out. Right at this moment, during this act of faith, the text calls him Israel. And according to the source, the name Jacob means the striver, the guy who does things his own way. But Israel means God rules. So the name change itself signals the shift. He's no longer acting in his own strength, but as an instrument of God's will.
Okay, so let's talk about the mechanism of victory here. What is this powerful faith? What gave both Isaac and Jacob the victory over two totally different kinds of will?
Well, the author argues that the absolute key was their focus on what he calls kommended ting, which just means things to come. Their faith wasn't based on the present circumstances, what they could see, what they felt, what their son wanted. No, it was a belief in the unseen, the promised, the future realities that God had spoken about. And this focus on things to come is what grants the victory. It lifts your focus beyond your own weaknesses and failures. It makes the struggles you're facing right now seem small and temporary. It aligns your actions with God's ultimate purpose, not your immediate feelings. And that's how it overcomes both the will of the flesh, our own desires, and the will of man, what others want from us. So, is there a lesson in all this for today? Well, let's bring it home. The author concludes that this isn't just some ancient history lesson, it's a living, breathing principle. I mean, think about it. The exact same two wills challenge our belief today, don't they? We have our own internal preferences, our own will of the flesh about how we think things should be done. And then we have the external pressures, the will of man, from people around us, good people, who say, hey, not so, my brother, you're doing it wrong. So what's the answer? According to the source material, there is only one way to overcome both of these challenges. And the path to victory is exactly the same today as it was for them. It's a faith that is focused not on the present, not on what's visible, but on the future and the invisible things to come. True victory, then and now, comes from shifting our focus off of the here and now and onto what God has promised. So that leaves us with a pretty good question to think about, right? Which will is the bigger challenge for your belief? Is it the internal one, your own desires, or is it the external one, the pressure from others? Something to chew on. Thanks so much for joining us for this one.